You're familiar with the writings. We now focus on the wisdom writings. In this lecture, we'll focus on the wisdom writings and attend to the idea of theodicy, which we find most prevalent in the book of Job. In the Christian Old Testament, the writings make up the third of four divisions. Here, the writings simply contain Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Songs, and Lamentations. Importantly, the book of Job, the book of Proverbs, and the book of Ecclesiastes all count as the wisdom writings. Before moving to a discussion of theodicy, I now frame the wisdom corpus. Dictionaries define wisdom as the ability to make sound judgments on what we know, especially as it relates to life and conduct. The wise do not value the quantity of knowledge by itself, but the ethical and moral dimensions of how we evaluate human experience and act on it. The sages of Israel lived in a time of much less scientific knowledge of the universe and its operations, and depended more heavily on traditional understandings and ways of acting than modern society does, so that they worked from a somewhat broader concept of wisdom. On the one hand, they saw wisdom as a serious intellectual pursuit of knowledge about the world and its rules of order and the dynamics behind its mysterious operations. On the other, they sought the proper human response to all dimensions of this world, especially in terms of understanding themselves in relation to their human nature and to God, the Creator. To the ancient mind, the universe was profoundly interpersonal, and all things were the product of either the personal will or the deity or of human decisions. Many believe that wisdom is the act of grappling with life's unanswerable questions. Some say wisdom is something passed down through tradition. Others hold that it is connected to prosperity. After all, according to Ben Franklin, wealthy and wise go together. Admittedly, wisdom and its literature are full of contradictions about its contours and its character. This situation is complicated by the variety of phenomena that employ the Hebrew word hokum, wise, or hokmah, wisdom, and similar ideas in the ancient Near East. For the purposes of this lecture, however, I define wisdom literature as those writings that have as their telos, or ultimate end, the attainment of a life well lived and rewarded by the divine. This definition captures both the act and the end of wisdom. Though grounded in an understanding of the ancient Near Eastern thought, this definition relies heavily upon the way wisdom is taken up in the Hebrew Bible and Old Testament corpus. It specifically leverages the concepts of the first collection of Proverbs, but also considers the more abstract and enigmatic concerns of Job and Ecclesiastes. Scholars such as James Crenshaw, Ronald Williams, Giorgio Bercoletti, W.G. Lambert, Michael V. Fox, and Sarah Denning Bowles often define and delimit wisdom and its literature based upon the broad corpus of written material from the ancient Near East and the narrower canon of the Hebrew Bible or Old Testament. For the purposes of our time together, I engage the work of James Crenshaw because his treatment of the wisdom material and wise characters reflects the contours and concerns of the current wisdom discourse. I'm using Crenshaw as a stand-in for biblical scholars who focus on wisdom literature. Though Crenshaw has written prolifically in this area, his essay, The Contemplative Life in the Ancient Near East, suggests that the original authors of wisdom literature pondered life's enigmas in a variety of forms, including extensive dialogue, aphorisms, riddles, and popular sayings. Extensive dialogues or disputation has particular characteristics which include a mythological introduction and conclusion, the dialogue proper, and a divine resolution. We see all of this in the book of Job. The book of Job, with its alternating arguments between Job and his three friends, may be considered an example of extensive dialogue. An aphorism is a pithy observation that contains a general truth. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Technically, an aphorism is an expression of the insights of an individual. It can therefore be distinguished from a proverb, which is an unattributed expression of collective wisdom. The authority of an aphorism, thus, depends on the prestige of that individual. For our purposes, however, you can think of proverbs as an example of aphorisms. The riddle is a wisdom genre common in the literature of the ancient Near East. Examples abound in Sumerian, Babylonian, Assyrian, Egyptian, Iranian, and Greek sources. The widespread riddle, what is the strongest thing in the world, is represented in the Samson stories we find in Judges. Riddles are not limited to the writing corpus, but appear throughout the Old Testament and are related to fables, parables, and metaphors, all of which require that the hearer or reader look behind the words and images to discern the meaning or hidden wisdom therein. One function of the riddle form is to test the participants and hearers in order to discern some truth. But this quest for truth can take a playful turn during the riddling. The riddle contest in the Samson narrative, in which the Israelite is matched against the Philistines in both intellectual and physical contests, is an example of this playfulness, occurring in a setting with quite high stakes. And we see this in Judges 14. The ingredients of a riddle are 1, code language, that 2, simultaneously informs and conceals. When you think about the wisdom corpus, remember, we are dealing with man-made categories, and each of these categories is part of a cultural tradition. Remember, context matters. And they are all people-focused. Life's harsh enigmas render belief in a benevolent deity difficult. It is hard to believe a God is loving and caring when bad things happen to good people. Theodicy is the attempt to defend divine justice in the face of aberrant phenomena that appear to indicate the deity's indifference or hostility toward virtuous people. Ancient Israel's conviction that God shaped historical events to benefit a covenant nation exacerbated the issue, particularly in the wake of events associated with the exile. Wisdom literature took up the problem of theodicy in earnest. The book of Job offered several partial answers: human ignorance, divine mystery, corrective discipline, delayed punishment, and rewards, but acknowledged the problem as an insolvable enigma before which the best response was silence in the presence of a self-revealing creator. The book of Job is an extensive work of prose and poetry found in the writings of the Old Testament. The book recounts the moving story of a righteous individual who encounters horrendous suffering, is castigated by his friends, challenges God, and is finally convicted, vindicated, and restored. Although the book is commonly associated with the wisdom books, Job holds a unique place within the biblical literature, for it broaches matters of the human condition and theology that are nowhere else conveyed with such pathos, anguish, and despair. The book of Job is divided into three major sections: the prologue, the dialogue, and the epilogue. We're not going to focus on the popular prologue and epilogue in this class. We will deal with the less common dialogue. The dialogue actually contains the majority of the material found in Job. Importantly, I want you to see how the dialogue presents as a legal complaint. Throughout the text, Job speaks of wanting to present his case before God. As you read the book of Job, look for the legal language, the legal themes, and legal motifs. According to Douglas Knight, theodicy can be understood as the attempt to reconcile the presence of suffering or evil in the world with the notion that the supreme deity is both good and powerful. It represents a severe human crisis that in one form or the other is confronted in most all religions and cultures. In the book of Job, the problem of theodicy is discussed between Job on the one hand and four of his friends on the other. Job's loss of family and welfare has produced deep suffering for him. The friends try to help him by presenting 5 main arguments to justify that his suffering is warranted. Job responds often with great passion that he has not deserved this suffering and that God owes him an explanation. The 5 arguments presented by the friends are: suffering is punishment for sinning or wrongdoing, and there is no such thing as undeserved suffering. It is arrogant to question the legitimacy or purpose of suffering. God can do no wrong in causing suffering. The punishment or suffering could be much worse than its current form, and one should be thankful that one is spared what one deserves. And finally, suffering occurs for the purpose of discipline. Throughout the dialogues, Job answers his friends with the following: I'm innocent. God's afflictions are unprovoked. My friends bring me no comfort. Death would be a relief for me. I am insignificant, so why should God bother with me? There is no connection between virtue and reward or between wickedness and punishment. Humans are helpless before God. Humans have a hard, even hopeless life. And finally, do not patronize me. We've covered a great deal of material in this lecture, and I know it is a lot to take in. Your class notes, the supplemental videos, and your readings should help solidify the material around wisdom literature and theodicy for you. Thank you.